Hello BookTube. In a departure from my usual car repair tutorials, I thought for this video I would instead talk to you about a bunch of books. A barrage of books, several of which I've read, several of which I haven't read, several of which I've partly read. And I was going to end, I've got a pile here on the desk, and I was going to end with the big books. They naturally put themselves at the bottom of the pile, but that would be an awful depressing ending for a Saturday video. So instead we're going to start with those, because they're really good, but they're a bit of a downer. In fact, quite a bit of a downer. The first one, when I mention a book that's a downer, if you've been watching my channel recently, you're going to kind of sort of know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the newest entry in the Photo Arc series from National Geographic. These are photos by Joel Sartori, who brings animals into his studio, puts them against a black backdrop, somehow manages to calm them down, and gets portraits of them the like of which I have never seen in a lifetime of looking at animal photography books. And the latest National Geographic Photo Arc book is called Vanishing. And that's all it is just highly detailed photo portraits of animals that are vanishing, or that have technically already vanished. The first section of this book is called Ghosts. And in the section called Ghosts, we deal with the animals who are effectively extinct. They have maybe a small population in zoos, but they are not extant in the wild anymore. And it goes up from there, depending on their endangered status. And I know that the book's intent is not to be depressing. I know that. I know this is National Geographic. There's no more hopeful or optimistic an organization anywhere in the world. And I know that the goal is to show you these, for want of a better word, human portraits of these animals, so that you'll be all the more inspired to help save them, even the ones that can't technically be saved. But nevertheless, going through this page after page after page, seeing these things that have lived for millions and millions of years, that are dying now. I mean, the book does its best to sound an ecumenical note, but really underneath the surface, and not very far underneath the surface, is the realization you get after 2 pages or 10 pages of this book that these are all these animals are dying because of humans. There's no other reason. They're not. It's not mysterious and impersonal forces of nature that are wiping them out after being on Earth, sometimes since before the dinosaurs, in the case of sturgeons, for instance. Instead, it's humans that are doing this. And that's a bit of a depressing way to start our book barrage. It just gets more depressing, because when I was done scrutinizing this book, I immediately went to other books in my collection along the same lines. Like, for instance, this one. This is called Witness. And it is very much the same thing. It centers on North America, but it is very much the same thing. A big, beautifully illustrated pictorial account of all the endangered species in North America. Now, one of the crucial ways that this thing differs from the National Geographic volume is that it deals with all endangered species, not just charismatic mammals, but plants, insects, all kinds of stuff, all the things that are on the edge in North America. And I went from there to one of the loveliest and most heartbreaking books along these lines. I don't know why I have so many of these things in my collection. This is by Tim Flannery, whose name will be known to some of you, and this is called A Gap in Nature. And there are no photos in here. Instead, this is just gorgeous artwork by Peter Shooten. I think he's the artist. Yeah, Peter Shooten is the author, the artist. And this is not a book about vanishing animals, about animals on the brink of extinction. This is a book about extinct animals, animals that don't exist anymore. And the artist does his best to envision them, and sometimes that's easier than others. Sometimes we only have skeletons. But this is the reason that it is so much sadder than the other 2 books is because of Tim Flannery's skill as a writer, working here against the peace of mind of the reader. And that's sort of the journey that the National Geographic volume took me through. I went through that book and then immediately went to these others. And so I want to start with that, because I really, really recommend the Photo Arc volume, Vanishing. And I really, really recommend the other Photo Arc volumes. The very first National Geographic Photo Arc book, if you're not, I mean, the second one is about birds, and this third one is about endangered animals, or animals who are technically extinct. But The first one is just page after page after page of great portraits of animals. And if you haven't looked at it, the first one might be one to get. That wouldn't completely crush your spirits, I don't know. Although, considering that your own species is complicit here, your spirits could do with a little crushing. So if you don't want to buy this Vanishing volume, at least get it from the library. You should know what's in it. Even though it's unpleasant knowledge, you should know what's in it. So then we're going to go on to ordinary books, and we'll hope that the mood picks up from there. This next one is the latest in a series. I've talked about it on this channel. I cannot praise it highly enough. This is Sidney Blumenthal, who embarked years ago on an old style, 19th century style multi-volume biography of Abraham Lincoln. It's tough to do. It's tough to get a publisher to bite at a multi-volume biography anymore these days. It's I think maybe the consensus in the publishing world is that there really isn't the readerly interest for it. I don't know. One way or another, it always makes me a little suspicious. Naturally, the editor in me always says, well, do you need 5 volumes to write a life of one evolved ape on Earth? No matter who they are, no matter what they did, do you really need 5 volumes? Well, isn't 800 pages enough? Is your book a monument to your scholarship or a monument to your verbosity? And so I went into this thing with a little bit of suspicion, especially since I mean, I loved the first few volumes. I think Sidney Blumenthal gets better and better as a writer as he goes on in life. But the first couple of volumes of a multi-volume life of Abraham Lincoln can be distilled fairly rigorously, fairly easily, without missing anything. And unfortunately, this multi-volume set, I didn't change that opinion in me. But the closer Lincoln gets to the public eye, and then finally when he gets in the public eye, and the closer he gets to politics, and then when he's in politics, the closer he gets to national politics, the more I found myself appreciating Blumenthal's digging into every single little detail, especially since he never loses his ability to tell a great story. So now finally in these later volumes, there is a great story to tell. You can have all the great storytelling ability in the world when you're talking about some kid who's gawky, and who in 40-year-old retrospective, a whole bunch of people who lived from that time said, I thought he was going to come to something. But now, this latest one, the latest book in this series, goes from 1856 to 1860. You'll notice the years are getting shorter. This is All the Powers of the Earth. And this is Lincoln as a politician, in the scrum of things, realizing that he has a shot at it all, that he has a shot at the brass ring, that he has a shot at being president. And Blumenthal takes us inside all of the maneuvering, all of the political backdoor machinations, and all of the personalities. I don't know if I can quickly find it for you here, but this book doesn't have, there we go. This book doesn't have an inset of the usual boring black and white photos. Instead, all throughout, it has really good high definition black and white reproductions of portraits of the men and women involved. And it has a cumulative effect that is just amazingly powerful to bring these people to life. That and Blumenthal's own writing. And at the heart of it all is Lincoln himself. You will never, I know it's trite to say, but in this volume, All the Powers of the Earth, it will change the way you think of Abraham Lincoln. It will knock him firmly off the marble throne that he occupies on the Mall in Washington, D.C. It will make him a person for you. Even a politician, the lowest form of person. And it makes me all the more eager for what I'm assuming will be the concluding volume. I mean, this one ends in 1860. I would really hope that Sidney Blumenthal, as much as I'm loving these books, I would hope that he wouldn't stretch the next book into 2. I would hope that it would be 1860 to 1865. I would hope that would be the next book. I'm hoping that it's twice this size, but it doesn't need to be any longer than that. And one way or another, I'm on board. So, ordinarily, out of respect for your Amazon wish lists and your TBRs, I would only recommend to you a big fat book. One big fat book. You only have so much reading time, especially since you insist on spending 10, 11 hours of every single day completely unconscious, drooling out of your nose and mouth. I didn't make you do that, okay? but in light of all of those enormous restrictions, and some of you have chosen to mate and to spawn. Some of you have these things called jobs. Good Lord. So your reading time is precious. So ordinarily I wouldn't recommend a multi-volume biography. No matter how good it is, Stephen Kotkin is writing right now an absolutely great but brutally crushing multi-volume life, for instance, of Joseph Stalin. And as much as I love the last volume, it was 1,200 pages long. And it was 1,200 pages of lying and offhand homicide. And that can be a little bit depressing. And especially since I'm fairly certain, I mean, I don't know for sure, but ordinarily it is heavily suggested to authors who are writing multi-books about anything, whether it's the history of the United States Navy in World War II, or the biography of Joseph Stalin, or in this case, A Life of Abraham Lincoln. It's strongly suggested to the author at some point in the procedure that maybe they would like to write a one-volume recension of all of this, that maybe that would be a good idea. They wouldn't have to add anything new. They could just make a short one-volume work. I have almost a 100% certainty that Kotkin will do that for his Stalin biography, for instance. And I would be willing to bet that somewhere down the line, Blumenthal does that for this. I wouldn't be surprised if the finished book is called All the Powers of the Earth. I hope that it is a heck of a title. But in this case, even though I'm wary of your reading time, I would still recommend this book. Because there's no way that that the tidings in this book, the maneuverings of the new Republican Party, the maneuverings and the dreams and the periodic depressions of this unbearded Abraham Lincoln, there's no way that the details of this story won't get buried by the much more familiar details of the bearded Abraham Lincoln, Saint Abraham, during the Civil War. There's no way that they won't get buried by that, and they do merit individual attention. They merit attention on their own, so I recommend it. Even so, even though your reading time is buried. Then this next one, oh, I read it. It's a collection of short stories. I wanted to like it, and then when I realized that wasn't going to happen, I wanted to like little bits of it. Maybe one story here or there. This is Full Throttle by Joel Hill. And it's a collection of short stories, many of which have appeared in periodicals that I read, Asimov's or Science Fiction and Fantasy. And Joe Hill is famous on his own right now. He is an enormous fan favorite, has a gigantic fan base. And that has happened largely, I mean, not largely, but in some part, maybe 35%, independent of the fact that he is Stephen King's son. There's been a concerted effort on Joe Hill's part to distance himself from that patrimony and to try to sort of establish a fan base on his own. And I know plenty of young readers, young Dubrow readers, the same ones that were latching on to Stephen King 50 years ago. I know plenty of them who swear by Joe Hill and say that they don't really like Stephen King, that they haven't really liked his last 20 novels, but they like the son. And this is a collection of short stories, and of course I thought back immediately to Different Seasons, which was one of the last Stephen King books I read that I thought had any kind of effective prose in it at all. It was over the top, it was overdone, but there were large stretches of Different Seasons that were effective, I thought, that I really liked. In a kind of a, take no prisoners, I'm drunk when I write this, I'm not revising, don't expect to reread any of these sentences kind of way. I enjoyed large chunks of it. So thinking, here's Stephen King's son, and he is at what other people might call the beginning of his career. He's an enormous success on his own. But so I looked at a collection of short stories and I thought, okay, well, other editors had to accept these things. A lot of these things appeared elsewhere before they appeared in this book. So this is not just an awestruck agent and a grateful publisher willing to take anything that comes from this guy's word processor. People don't use word processors anymore, do you? Get my point. Zip it. This is some of these things have been vetted by other editors, and you never know what's involved there, but God almighty, book 2, I didn't like any of it. I didn't like any of it. The few stories that did not partake of the number one fault of the current modern incarnation of Stephen King, which is an infinite self-regard, there on the page, not in interviews, but there on the page of the printed fiction. The few stories that did not indulge in that, only this kind an infinite regard for Joe Hill, were hackneyed, and they go on for even 20-page stretch. The first 5 pages of that 20-page stretch have obviously never met nor ever heard of the final 5 pages of that stretch. It's just The standard reviewing term is I wanted to like it, but I didn't. Not a single word of it. So, some of the stories, I admit, if I take a step back, some of the stories were a little more effective than some of the others. But effective at what? Effective at what? Was I ever challenged to think about anything new? No. Was I ever scared? No. Was I ever impressed by writerly ability? No. No, I was not. So I'm not really sure what this book was trying to do to a reader, and I'm suspecting that it was trying to do all of those things, and it just didn't work on me. But this next one, I think we saw an advanced copy of it on this channel. It's what if science fiction. It's the kind of science fiction like Fatherland by Harris, where you postulate a different course of history. I think we saw the advanced copy on this channel. Certainly we didn't see this gorgeous cover art. And I went into it a little skeptical because those what ifs tend to bug me. Usually I have found, whether it's The Man in the High Castle, or there are a million of them, the type of book I'm talking about. What if the Germans won World War II is the most popular one. What if the Russians had invaded during the height of the Cold War? What if, Martin Luther had died in a thunderstorm and there was no Protestant Reformation, or whatever. It's a big booming sublet of historical fiction. And usually the thing that bothers me about these books is that usually the characters in them know that they're in an alternate universe, and they shouldn't. It's their only universe. Usually, even if they're not explicit about it, you can tell that they know, and that drives me crazy. That just drives me crazy. If you're reading What If the Nazis Won World War II, and you slog your way all to page 450, and you have a small scene where Himmler is at a dinner table and he says, "Oh, my friends, do you ever think what would have happened if we had lost?" Please. Please. If your characters know they're in a novel, then I have no interest in reading it. And I was worried that would happen here, especially in light of the East versus West rising tide in this world, in the real world that we're in. But I didn't get any of that. This is just terrific. You're going to love it. It's by Raymond Khoury, and it's called Empire of Lies. And it's about, as you can tell from that, look at that cover. It's about a world in which the forces of Islam conquered the West 1,000 years ago and have been in control ever since of the West, aside from the fanatical, frothing at the mouth Christian Republic of America, which even from its first appearance in this book, even an objective reader is led to wonder, well, are they any better? is that really any better? Or should we count our blessings? And I think one of the things that makes this a success where a lot of these books aren't is that in this case there is a conscious awareness that this is an alternate reality. There is a character who knows that, a semi-science fiction character who can move between realities and knows that. And so it's not just ordinarily in this type of book. I'm sure you've read your share of them. In this type of book, there will come a moment when one of the main characters, they're always young, will say to another one of the main characters, "I don't know, this just doesn't feel right. It just doesn't feel like this is the real reality. It feels wrong. It feels like we're in the wrong version of reality." And I never have any patience with that. Trust me. About 190 million Americans wake up every morning in 2019 feeling that same thing, but we don't think that we don't think we're living in an alternate reality. We just think our current reality sucks eggs, and nobody would think otherwise. But inevitably, in books like this, somebody does, and in this book, they at least have a reason, if you know what I mean. I don't want to spoil anything in the book, but if you want to borrow it from your library, or if you're flush with cash, or maybe you've got a gift certificate to Barnes & Noble, or you've got a Barnes & Noble one of those membership cards, or there's a coupon, or whatever it is, this is just the sort of what if historical thriller that you're going to love. You're just going to love it. It's not going to be a waste of your reading time at all. Then this next one, we go straight to history, and this is from Harvard University Press. I don't think we've seen it on this channel, and what's the diplomatic way to put this? It's not exactly written to entertain. Let's put it that way. And ordinarily that would be the kiss of death for me in a work of history. This is a work of history. And ordinarily, if a historian gets a contract with Harvard or Oxford or whatever and just drones and bloviates for 400 pages, I'm not going to recommend their book no matter what, unless I get the impression that the droning is important, or unless I get the impression that maybe their view of what they should do on the printed page for their audience is radically different from my own, and maybe the strength of their research, the power of their writing, just absolves them of that. I'm thinking of, for instance, Adam Tooze, who I don't think in the course of, he's a historian, and I don't think in the course of his writing career he has ever thought about entertaining his readers, and he doesn't, certainly, but his books are terrific. And maybe this is that kind of thing. You can judge it for yourself at your library or whatever. This is by R.W. Kostal, and it is called Laying Down the Law. And it is the first full-length book treatment I have ever read about the two miraculous things that the Allies did in the wake of World War II, which was to recreate the economies of Germany and Japan, instead of laying them under yoke, executing all of the citizens, selling off the children into slavery, or, you know, in the modern equivalent, busing the children to some other country where they can be, quote-unquote, re-educated. The fates of Germany and Japan at the end of World War II were as defeated as any belligerent nations had ever been in the history of the world. They were completely supine. And their fate at almost any other point in the history of the world, certainly after a war as bitter and protracted and costly in terms of blood as World War II, their fate in any other war would have been almost completely different. I can tell you, and if you read history, you can tell me what their fate would have been. The gutters would have run thick with blood. And that would be that. That has always been the fate of the defeated, especially belligerents. And in this case, instead of that, the Allied powers, and especially America, not only pumped tons of money into these prostrate countries, but also tried to rewrite their DNA. Tried successfully. I mean, let's call a spade, right? Post-war Japan and post-war Germany were largely successful experiments. Bumps along the road, definitely in both cases, especially Germany, but not occupation by a foreign country. Self-determination. People who could go on calling themselves German and Japanese, and eventually, down the line, these things take time, self-sustaining and healthy economies, representative democracies. And this book is about those early days. It's about those two reconstruction efforts. And again, it's no John le Carré, but it's fascinating. I just thought it was so good. So good. I have a sweet tooth for World War II history anyway. But this is, you know, World War II aftermath history, but done really well. So if you also have a sweet tooth for World War era history, you probably don't want to miss Laying Down the Law. Who is the author when he's at home? He's a professor in the Faculty of Law at Western University, Ontario. And he's the author of a couple of other books. And he knows this subject. He writes with a I shouldn't be too harsh on his writing ability. He clearly means to sit down and have an extremely serious talk with his readers, bringing to that talk all of his research. In other words, he's going to do most of the talking. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that, right? I have praised, for instance, in my Unending Library tour, I have praised Sir Ronald Sim, who does the same thing. So, I guess my point is that there are different kinds of history. I mean, for instance, All the Powers of the Earth, Sidney Blumenthal's Lincoln book, reads very differently than Laying Down the Law. It is a very different, much more personality-driven story. They both have their place at the table of history, so I wanted to recommend this, strongly recommend it. Then we move on to something that's not out yet. I've been very good so far. I've been trying to show you books that are either out already or are coming out on Tuesday. This one is, I think, next month. No, this is November, but I couldn't wait. I couldn't wait to read it, and it was terrific, absolutely terrific. This is Martin Cruz Smith. It's called The Siberian Dilemma. That's a very boring title, but this is an Arkady Renko novel, who is a character that this author has been writing since. I don't even know. When did Gorky Park appear? It was in the 1980s, when the whole world made sense. It might even have been 1980. It's been a long time. And Arkady Renko is an investigator in Russia, and he is a great character, a fantastic creation. There are characters around him, and there have been characters that have come in and out of subsequent books that were fairly well drawn, but Renko is every bit as great a character as George Smiley. it's a little bit confusing to me that Martin Cruz Smith is not held on the same level as John le Carré. I don't really understand that. They're very much of a type, and they're very much writing the same kinds of books, and also very much the same change has occurred in them as their books have gone on, especially since the Cold War ended, and then this weird, I don't even know what you'd call it, between America and Russia has revived. I don't even know what stage of that we're in now, but for a while there was the Cold War, and that's where all these people made their dime, and then the Cold War summarily ended. And it wasn't that it rebranded itself, it just stopped. And you know, I thought, well, these Cold War writers who are still out and about making money are out of a job. And instead they adapted their work. Le Carré did a great job of that. Martin Cruz Smith has done a great job of that. And this is very much of a type with late Le Carré. It's thinner, it's in the good sense of the word, like a knife. It's whittled, and it's sadder, wiser. I mean, there's thrilling aspects in here. There are gunfights and action and whatnot, and all sorts of subterfuge. But really, the attitude is what I loved, what I took away about my first reading. I'll read this again when I get the finished copy. But the attitude, and it is what I like the most about it, and it's what reminded me of the last few Arkady Renko novels. So, if you're a fan of this series and you didn't know this book was coming out, it's coming out in November, and you're gonna love it. Especially if you've made your peace, if you come to like the change in tone that I'm talking about. Then the next one is a little thing. It won't take me any time at all to read, but it will probably take me the rest of my life to understand. This is by Daniel Oberhaus, who is a science and technology journalist whose work has appeared in The Atlantic, Popular Mechanics, Slate, and Baffler. And this is Alien Extraterrestrial Languages. Look at that. There are going to be a couple of you who know what that is, and I don't. I don't know. I don't think I ever will, no matter what this book does to me. But this is all about how we would communicate with aliens, intelligent aliens, if we ever met them. I myself don't think we ever will. But if we did, and they had a language, and it had evolved completely differently than anything known on Earth, how would we communicate with them? Let me read you just a bit here, since I haven't read it either. The endlessly fascinating question of whether we are alone in the universe has always been accompanied by another, more complicated one. If there is extraterrestrial life, how would we communicate with it? In this book, Daniel Oberhaus leads readers on a quest for extraterrestrial communication. Exploring Earthlings' various attempts to reach out to non-Earthlings over the centuries, he poses some not entirely answerable questions. If we send a message into space, will extraterrestrial beings receive it? Will they answer? What language will they and we speak? Is there not only a universal grammar, as Noam Chomsky has posited, but also a grammar of the universe? And I was deeply interested in the spacecraft, one of the spacecrafts that humans sent out into space, bearing on it, engraved on its plates, a whole bunch of attempts to bridge that kind of language gap. But books like this always, I mean, I'll read this, absolutely, and see if, I wonder how much math there is in it. Oh, not much. It looks like it's mostly prose. I'll read this, and I'm sure it'll fascinate me, but it will also irritate me. I've read books like this before, and they irritate me because what are we talking about here? We're talking about human beings conversing, finding a way to converse with other sentient creatures elsewhere in the universe. And by sentient, we mean able to self-regard, able to regard others, able to actively dislike suffering, and able to appreciate things in the abstract, as opposed to just in the day-to-day, moment-by-moment physical. And if you use that, you certainly can't use IQ points or strict Cartesian intelligence, right? If you're going to say that only things that have those are intelligent, then you're going to wipe out from that consideration large chunks of humanity. And no one wants to do that. No one wants to call a Down syndrome kid not intelligent. Intelligence isn't the only thing. Instead, you want to talk about those criteria that I just listed for reaching out to complex life, complex sentient life that can respond. And when I read books like this, coming up with all these elaborate mathematical ways to do that, I am always a little irritated because animals like that, sentient beings like that, abound on this planet. And they always have. They are all around human beings who have made almost no attempt to bridge that gap. Almost none. And that's a little frustrating. There is almost certainly where you're watching this video, within half an hour's car drive from you, there is at least one cow. One adult cow. And an adult cow can do all of the things that I just described. They are an alien sentient being. There's been no attempt made to communicate with such beings or to understand how they understand the world. There's been plenty of attempts made to come up with new and bigger factories to house them while we harvest them for their meat, carving it off their bodies while they're still alive in front of their children. But there's been almost no attempt made to say, well, how does a cow think? You know, there've been almost no good faith attempts to say, well, how does, for instance, what's the marquee animal when it comes to this would be the dolphin. Until comparatively recently, until the 21st century, there were almost no attempts to ask, how does a dolphin think? Instead, it was, how effectively can we teach dolphins to mimic our thinking? Can we get Coco to learn sign language? Coco has a language of his own. Wolves have languages of their own. Killer whales in the open ocean have languages of their own. You don't have to harvest them with a net, beat them with electric prods, and teach them how to bow and wave to crowds. That is not, for the longest time, that was the sum and essence of humankind's ability to try and understand alien languages. So when I think about this, I think, you know, I'm sure that I will like this book. I'm sure that it will entertain me. But I'm sure that I'll be thinking the whole time, we don't have to go to Tau Ceti. We don't have to go to extraterrestrials. Why don't you take some of this hyper thought and turn it towards raccoons, for instance, who have all of this. They have everything that we would call sentience and nothing that we wouldn't rule out. You don't want to call a small child not sentient, right? You don't want to do that, because the minute you do, you can harvest them for meat, according to the current view of humanity. There is currently, right now, going on in the UK, a massively accelerated what is called, euphemistically, a badger cull. Badgers have all of those qualities I was just talking about. They see the world. They understand themselves and others. They very much want to avoid suffering. They very much understand altruism. They have a sense of humor. There's a cull going on. There are no efforts like this to find out, you know, how can we speak with badgers. So that here endeth the rant. I just wanted to put this in front of you. This is by MIT Press, probably. They seem like the only ones that would be nerdy enough to do this. Yes, MIT Press, and I'm sure that it will fascinate me. And then the last thing, this has gone on way too long, this video, as always, when I get jabbering about books. The last one I want to show you is new from the folks at Liverite. It is gorgeous, and I'm hoping that one of you will want to review it in exchange for the book. This is the new annotated H.P. Lovecraft. This is called Beyond Arkham. Liverite did a previous eye-openingly gorgeous annotated volume. This has, you know, got the annotations in offset color on the sides, but it also has color and black and white photos and artwork all throughout, on almost every page, to show you where all these stories come from and where Lovecraft was when he thought them up. And there was an earlier volume, a great annotated H.P. Lovecraft, that it'll be in your libraries, well worth your time, especially if you're a Lovecraft fan. If you're a Lovecraft fan, you probably saved up your pfennigs and got it already. And this one is coming out soon. This is out next month, I believe. And this is a new, okay, I don't see a date off the top of my head, but it's soon. And it's edited by Leslie Klinger, who is great. He's one of the great editors of our time. And this is stuff that wasn't in that first volume, including a lot of stuff that Lovecraftian fans clearly wanted to be in that first volume. I'm sure that this is in large part a response to reader responses that were sent in to W.W. Norton. This is a lot more of that stuff, a lot more annotated Lovecraft. It's a second helping. And I will read it, and I'm sure that I will enjoy it. I'm sure that I will enjoy the critical apparatus. But I have to admit, this author has never done it for me. I know that he has legions of fans, and I know that they're seeing something. This is not a case where I'm blaming the author. I just don't see it myself. That's all. And since I don't, I would much rather that a Lovecraft fan review this for me, for Open Letters Review, the online literary journal where I am an editor. So if you're one of those people and you'd like to try this, then, you know, sing out in the comments field, or just email me. I'm at st.donahue@gmail, and just let me know. With the only minor stipulation being that I am no longer sending review copies out of this country. It's just too expensive, and only a third of the time do they reach their destination. Most of the time they don't. So I don't know if that's a fault of mine, or it's a fault of Sometimes I've had people give me their address for, lower Botswana land, and I write to them back and say, okay, is this address complete? Because to my untrained eye, it looks like it's too small. It's too short. Are you leaving anything out? And they respond 2 days later by saying, oh yeah, there's this vital detail that I did leave out. Well, no wonder half my packages don't get where they're going. So if you're in America and you want to review this book, let me know. And in exchange, I will send you the book. So there you go. Good Lord, this went on for a long time. That was just a Saturday barrage of books. So no particular rhyme or reason other than that I've got a captive audience and I love torturing your TBRs. So I'm going to wrap this up for now, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.